This year, I want you to join me in not listening to what Canada's Prime Minister has to say about Remembrance Day. Every year, politicians proclaim that the war dead gave their lives to protect our democracy, our freedom, our prosperity, our way of life. What they should really be saying is that the ignorance of some malicious politicians, elected through a democracy, compelled us to assemble armies of people to die fighting their fascist desire for world domination. That this pattern of thought stole opportunity from both those who took up arms and the majority who died, who weren't soldiers, is never lamented. What is also not lamented is the fact that those that died didn't merely lose the opportunity to enjoy life, but the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to the progress of our species. Progress which is enabled by science. Progress which is recorded in books. I shouldn't need to remind anyone where our federal government stands on the sciences, or what degree of interest it has in recording scientific knowledge in books, such as were recently destroyed en masse. I shouldn't need to remind anyone about how invasive and dangerously obstructive our security infrastructure has become toward progress, or how our democratic system now bears more resemblance to an unnecessary vestigial limb than a meaningful deliberative process. But I want to talk to you about how we perceive one another in life, and about the people that died in the war, because I don't think we lament enough what we actually lose to war. I want to talk about one person that made an enormous impact on my life, whom was profoundly affected by fascist governance during the Second World War, and how it relates to the same political patterns emerging today. This person came to America as the Nazis were appropriating his property and systematically finding and burning all of his publications, claiming that they were the irrelevant writings of a silly Jew. This person fled to America along with another very close colleague of my mentor's mentor. This Jew, whom was seen by a fascist government as nothing more than a lump of flesh on the promenades of power-crazed, malicious politicians, was none other than Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr fled to America, not merely because the Nazis were fascist, but especially because they were ignorant. And with ignorance comes tremendous suffering. They both worked closely with John Archibald Wheeler, under whom my mentor was a postdoctoral fellow. This group of people expressed tremendous interest in the underlying patterns of the universe. Among them, a school of thoughtful exchange emerged, by which such minds as Stephen Hawking, David Bohm, Richard Feynman would also refine their ideas about existence. Now, without this lump of flesh and the collaboration with the colleagues he retained, it is estimated that more than 80% of the world's current economy would be absolutely impossible. Yet to this day, politicians speak repeatedly of how their policies will enliven our economy, and to this day, economies sputter and stagnate on the ignorant, futile policies of politicians. So what would have happened if after World War I, Germany was not forced into destitution and instead no one was killed? What further contribution might we have enjoyed from the millions that died? Often people assume that war is a major stimulus for the economy and that we benefit from the technologies we invest in during wars. But as a matter of fact, it is merely that we invest in science, and that the scientists are people with curiosity who are encouraged to engage in seemingly far-flung ideas. We don't actually require a war to stimulate economies at all. In fact, we only need to invest in the cultivation of intelligence and create a supportive environment for innovation that is inclusive to all people. So today we remember not only the people whose lives were taken by violence, but whose potentially immense contributions to science, progress, and prosperity were lost when their opportunity to engage in meaningful questions about our world and our universe were forcibly stolen from them. Now this begs the question, if the ignorance of power-hungry politicians whom plainly fail to appreciate the wellspring of prosperity is left unchallenged, what hope do any of us have of avoiding the increasingly desperate struggle for resources on this planet? Before we can answer this question, we need to understand a fundamental trait of human nature. While the majority of us may harbor a poor opinion of our fellow humans, we all share a very strange philosophical trait. Each and every one of us seeks to do the very best thing we can do in any given circumstance. In fact, this is true, provided you think about the problem carefully. You will see that even the worst actions carried out by people are informed by belief structures, and that is why we know, as a matter of fact, that ignorance is at the heart of all suffering, and that, as Socrates said, knowledge is sufficient for happiness. So if every slimy politician, every backroom lobbyist, every Machiavellian pundit, every strategic voter, every violent revolutionary, and every cutthroat business person are doing what they believe is the best thing to do, then plainly the problem is not merely with their actions, but with their beliefs about what the universe is. And the problem is not simply with their conclusions, but with their premises. For the entire universe, from subatomic particles to intergalactic filaments, is stunningly beautiful. How is it, then, that there is not one vile, disgusting thing in the whole universe with the exception of us? Plainly, there is something fundamentally amiss about how we think about the universe. There are many ideas that enable such acts as the Second World War, that disregard the inherent beauty of our universe and err on the side of human ignorance. But there is one that figures fundamentally into our ability to accept the loss, for instance, to Ebola on one continent and focus merely on keeping it out of another. This horrible idea was invented by Thomas Malthus, and it is called the doctrine of overpopulation. It has proven since its invention one of the worst catastrophic ideas in the entire human history of ethical bankruptcy. For the moment we presume the world to be overpopulated, we are logically compelled to sort humans into two subsets, necessary and expendable. And as this proposition of overpopulation is entirely fictitious, no one ever actually arrives in the necessary domain. As such, the more elite you become, the more you are compelled to increase the size of the perceived number of expendable people. So we see how important it is to be diligent on our beliefs, lest we find satisfaction in sending millions of people to die, people whose biology required enormous resources from this planet to create, people among whom are minds like Einstein's. But we also see that if we carefully analyze the planet and the universe, we see from population ecology that our numbers are not the problem so much as our behavior. The planet has throughout its history uninterrupted evidence supporting enormous populations of organisms and deeply benefiting from those populations, and in fact this is well demonstrated to be a driver of evolution. So only when we realize that opinions are a form of rationalization will we realize that we need to embrace knowledge. For the combustible mixture of the powerful world Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr gave us, with the depth of ignorance and stupidity that the politicians you keep electing wield, is about to explode in our face. As Einstein said, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. So it boils down to this: if we fail to think carefully together, and if we fail to struggle ceaselessly together, and if we fail to pursue the smartest path together, and if we fail to overcome the difficulties together, then we will fail to visit the stars together, and we will fail to rescue this planet together, and we will all die together. I am very worried as I see that while people appear exponentially interested in science, we are also increasingly hateful of industry. I'm worried because it takes a great deal of resources and time to create the industries we have, and all industries are indeed science applied. Destroying an industry is like removing an interface between our ability as a species and the patterns of the universe. Saying nuclear is inherently evil due to the wastes completely misses the fact that in the next few years we will need nuclear fuel and quite possibly be able to use the waste for nuclear pulse propulsion, safely ferrying the waste to the International Space Station using single-stage orbit airplanes designed by Skylon, and by which we can send probes and instruments at unimaginable speeds throughout the local region of our galaxy. By abandoning nuclear technology, we limit our understanding of our place in the universe. What we need to do is direct the industry intelligently. The problems with industry arise from the fact that they constitute science applied simply for the purpose of making money. Science applied as politicians would apply it. Science applied with insufficient care and thought. Science applied in ignorance and shielded from public participation and design. Since every ability we have is important to ensuring our permanence in this universe, then so too must this be true of major issues such as the tar sands. So, let me illustrate this principle with the most contentious issue in Canada, an issue which, at present, due to political incompetence and industrial ties to political incompetence, promises to evoke violence. We may wish to say that we must simply leave the tar sands where they are. However, if we see the tar sands as a horrific form of pollution on the west coast, why are we okay with leaving it a few feet below the surface of the boreal forest? The tar sands are a horrendously contaminated area. They have been for millions of years, and leaving them as such does not make the contamination go away, just as piping them to the coast is an even worse idea. Distributing oil is in principle a hazardous process, but burning it where it is found needn't be, for by its oxidization we get the building blocks of life. At present, I'm working with my mentor on a proposal to NASA to explore the use of the tar sands as a closed loop for autonomous terraforming. As we all know, there are planets and moons with hydrocarbon seas. There is one orbiting Saturn. Would you like to visit Titan and stare up at Saturn's rings? I would. If we changed the way we perceive the tar sands, we could create a proving ground for refining space outposts and exploration. By harnessing the heat, water, and carbon dioxide that is emitted when hydrocarbons are burned, we can create a completely closed loop for photosynthetic growth and net ecosystem productivity. This growth would prove necessary to ensure a healthy and resource-rich outpost suitable for pleasant human habitation. I know people that have lived on the International Space Station, and I know it is not a pleasant experience. We need to see our expansion into the universe as the planet's expansion into the universe. And the more we lose species, the less successful and pleasant that expansion is going to be. In effect, I see how the entirety of the tar sands could be carefully developed this way, as a mixed-use agricultural manufacturing industrial park, where all the tar is burned on-site and there are zero emissions. Rather, what would come from the tar sands are agricultural products taking advantage of the heat, electricity, and CO2 that result from combustion of the tar. While this eliminates the need to build pipelines to the coast, it requires more pipeline construction inside the tar sands, and so even Stanbridge is not left without purpose. By abandoning fracking, which is a horribly inefficient process and deforms the landscape, we can drill chambers into the tar deposits and pipe oxygen into them, burning the oil in the earth in an in-situ natural furnace. Depending upon the design of these chambers, we can draw out upgraded oil. Then, by taking advantage of the contaminated silica on site, we can fill and filter these deposits by pumping in silica and vitrifying the deposit as a chamber of fired clay, which in turn filters contaminants and can function like an in-ground filter. Compare this to how your elected representatives wish to pipe diluted bitumen to the coast, where it will be loaded onto ships on account of the fact that they have nothing else to take back to Asia. Why do they have nothing else to take back to Asia? Because Asia cannot afford much of what we make. So why are they here? They come to deliver stuff they make with the very same sin-crude energy we are hell-bent on exporting to them. Do we realize the profound inefficiency here? Can we not discover a way to take those factories that require this energy and put them in the tar sands? It is stupefying that anyone could call themselves a business person and maintain this pattern. So what we need to do is determine what the bulk of the manufactured exports are from China and build factories for their manufacturing in the tar sands. We can power these factories using the electricity we generate from the fuel in the earth. With the waste heat and water and scrubbed CO2, we can build massive hydronic greenhouse networks, which provide food throughout the winters. Local sand can be melted by the incinerators to create tempered glass for the greenhouses. The refined oils necessary for making safe synthetic rubber are plentiful, and thus we can create greenhouse sheltered lakes and even saltwater lakes for growing salmon even that should not be farmed on the west coast. We could in fact create a semi-subterranean industrial development and shelter the residual contamination of the tar sands from the wildlife, using the natural biome as insulation above the manufacturing plants even. The fish waste from the wetlands in the greenhouses can be pumped into the plants we grow for food and thereby fertilizes them, while the water that flows from the plants back into the water is once again clean enough for the fish. Already on site are the machinery necessary to build such earth-burned greenhouses. The cost is actually minimal compared to the profit from the food created, and the supplies for manufacturing that we lack are already on site. By capturing and treating rainwater and using it for growing food in these greenhouses, we reduce runoff into the tailings ponds and into the Athabasca from already developed areas. And we can dry the tailings ponds out and remediate them. By turning the tar sands into a massive hydronic greenhouse network interspersed with factories for manufacturing, we profoundly reduce the demand for tanker traffic, increase energy available to the grid, manufacture products domestically, sequester all the carbon dioxide emissions, and reduce our dependence on agriculture in the tropics during the winter months, agriculture, which is a major driver of extinction. By means of science, the oil in the ground could be harnessed and remediated and turned into clean, healthy food. And we could forego the unacceptable hazards of shipping oil and burning it in cars where the emissions are impossible to cap, while adapting our industry to serve as a form of remediation. The cost of food is plainly higher than oil. Now, the amount of attention and energy that it would take to think through all these problems is not exceeded by the amount of energy already spent decrying the tar sands. This in turn allows us to direct our attention to the most important environmental issue on Earth, that of species extinction and habitat loss. The main driver of habitat loss on Earth is agriculture. We need to quickly and rapidly expand all the surviving forests on this planet, as our capacity as a species is dependent upon the technologies they contain. As a scientist, I know for a fact that the biological diversity on this planet is by far its most valuable resource. And if we survive the next 10 years, we will look back in utter dismay that all we seemed to care about was carbon dioxide, and realize this sideshow is just a silly political conflict between energy producers. Anyone with even a little bit of knowledge who is genuinely interested to balance CO2 levels knows that solar panels will not accomplish this. We need to look at ways to green the Sahara and the Taclimacan deserts, not with agriculture, but by taking the same approach as NASA exobiologist McKay espouses. To summarize, we find ways to foster a maximal expansion of the life indigenous to the area. Many of us have seen the ways deserts explode into flowers and blooms after the smallest rainfall. By enhancing and expanding the oases in the Sahara, we can sequester the excess carbon in our atmosphere. By treating the oil deposits as contamination sites that can be creatively harnessed at a profit, we can continue to generate prosperity and progress and learn from these areas how to build closed-loop systems on other planets. And it would be barbaric not to embrace solar power, as there are good places to harness such on Earth, and solar power is extremely important in space. Now, we are so out of touch with one another and so distracted by our personal interests that there is a civil war brewing here in Western Canada. This is not healthy for our communities or for our industry. It is not a sound excuse for invasive surveillance, and it is certain that at our rate, the environment will bear the brunt of this stupidity. I want to see all people thrive, and I want to see our industries guided and enabled by an ever-increasing intelligence of people excited about science. I contend that both sides of this brewing war see each other as expendable, when in fact the only thing we need to dispense with is the ignorance and lack of innovations both sides thus far tout. Now, these ideas are the results when I consider what the most intelligent path forward is. Imagine what would happen if we all participated in deliberating the most intelligent solutions, because we all want the most intelligent solutions, and organized a way to make the investigation of our collective interests on this planet tenable. Imagine if our hopeless political system of voting for uneducated people to make decisions on our behalf were dismissed out of hand. Imagine if we created an online interface for collaboration in tremendous detail on the entirety of the problems before us as a species. Imagine if, as voters, we were accountable for selfish and careless votes, and if there existed incentives for identifying the most intelligent solutions to our problems. I know every person on Earth would be far better off in the bottom 1% on a planet driven wholly by collective intelligent decision-making than in the top 1% on a planet brimming with selfish morons. So why wait? I've already begun designing the system. When I decided to run for mayor in my municipality, I thought it would be a fun way to publish my proposition to create a human aggregate artificial intelligence as a decision-making apparatus for a direct eDemocracy by means of the smartphones we already carry around in our pockets. It sounds complex, but it is truly just this. the enabling of access to all academic literature on handheld devices, the creation of forums where users whom have collateral, something to lose in case they make careless decisions, can participate in voting on the best solutions on the decisions their communities face. And since I registered to run as a mayor, virtually everyone has dropped out but myself and the incumbent mayor, which has turned this effectively into a referendum on my proposition and a very real possibility that this municipality could become the first direct, accountable democracy in the history of planet Earth. Yet for that very same reason, there is absolutely no coverage of the fact, which demonstrates the profound rift between the people whose innovation created all that is good about this civilization and the people whose ignorance broker and mismanaged the wealth that results from that innovation. And so this Remembrance Day, in light of the profound potential lost to elected decision makers and the brewing conflict here in Canada, I ask you to seriously consider the proposition of creating direct accountable democracies. If I win here in Colwood, you have my commitment that I will find the means to challenge every level of government with this system, turning every election for representative democracy into a referendum on representative democracy. This Remembrance Day, we must recognize that it is ignorance that we died to stop. It is ignorance that killed the majority of people who die in war. It is ignorance that perpetuates our political process. And so this Remembrance Day, let us collectively mourn the absence of wisdom inherent to violence and make a commitment to find the best path forward together. For do you realize that every few years, the cumulative experience of our 7 billion strong species eclipses the age of the known universe? Anyone that would seek to diminish the span and breadth of problems that 7 billion minds can solve, and anyone so ignorant as to claim that there are too many people on this planet, has no intention of solving the enormous challenges we face as a species. For if we think carefully together, and if we struggle ceaselessly together, and if we find the smartest path together, and if we overcome these difficulties together, we will visit the stars together, and we will rescue this planet together, and we will all thrive together. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration and commitment to creating an exciting and inclusive future for all life on our planet.